we have to remember we were all had ancestors who were indigenous people. It wasn't just those folks. All of our ancestors were once indigenous, and their livelihood depended on closely watching nature, and we've lost that, and we can get it back just by observing and connecting.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm in Santa Barbara, the home of a couple of people who've been involved with sustainability for quite a while. I'm with Linda Bazell-Saltzman, who is an eco-therapist, and we'll learn about that in a minute, and Larry Saltzman, who's a permaculture practitioner. Well, I want to know, what woke you up to peak oil or climate change? Sort of what was the aha for you? When did that happen?
Oh, that was easy. It was several years ago, and we'd been involved in sustainability and working around the edge of a lot of these issues, and we're part of a think tank here in Santa Barbara called For the Future that was thinking about sustainability in local issues. And one night we heard about this film that was going to be playing in town, a documentary called The End of Suburbia, Oil Depletion and the Collapse of the American Dream.
Okay, that's a lot of people wake up on that one.
With a catchy, upbeat title like that, we decided to go see it, and it was a life-changing moment. The whole group of us went, and we looked at each other afterwards and said, this is it, this is the focus, this is the inroads to people to get them to change, is facing this problem.
So you were seeing peak oil as a wake-up for everybody else to...
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So the group of people that got together, what was that?
That was all of us who were members of For the Future. There's about 5 of us in the group. And I think we all went that night, and it was really quite it was an emotional evening.
Mm-hmm. Well, you kind of look at the fact that dead-end way we live is sort of, it's got some real limits to it. Linda, I want to ask you about, you founded an association, International Association for Ecotherapy, which I have never heard of. I've heard of eco-psychology. Right, good. There's a book by that title.
Yes.
So what started that? What propelled you to do that?
Well, I've been a psychotherapist for almost 30 years, and I really got interested in eco-psychology, which is the study of humans' relationship with nature. And it seemed obvious to me that a lot of the problems that I was seeing people having directly related to the fact of how unnaturally we live. So I got really interested in eco-psychology, and it was only a short step from that to move from the study of the human-nature relationship to how do we heal the human-nature relationship. And that's what ecotherapy is healing the human-nature relationship.
So, if I would understand right, we're looking at the kind of, in modern life, people are so disconnected from the natural world or natural processes?
Right, exactly. And a lot of things that people come to therapy complaining of, depression, anxiety, marital problems, family difficulties, a lot of them, when you sit down and ask people, how are you living? What is your day like? How much are you inside? How much are you outside? How much time do you actually spend with your spouse, with your children? How much time in nature? You listen to the answers to that and you say, well, of course you're depressed. Of course you're anxious.
Because they're not being in relationship.
Exactly, and because, we're primates, and we're a certain kind of primate.
All right.
And we evolved in a certain way.
Which is?
Well, if we can all go all the way back to how we evolved, we lived on the savannah, we lived outdoors, we didn't live inside little cubicles, we didn't look at screens all day. I mean, there's a whole way that we lived.
And we were social, right?
Exactly. We lived in community. We lived in a tribal situation. We weren't alone. We weren't all day with people we really didn't know that well. We were bonded with people. We had community.
We are pretty far from that, it would seem.
That's my interest in ecotherapy, is how do we get back to the garden?
And so, the garden, that's nice. I like, and the song goes singing by from Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Okay. how do you do that? What do you do what kinds of things do people discover and do then in the therapy?
Sometimes it's really simple, and it's not that different from ordinary therapy as you would think of it. But the prescriptions are different. The diagnosis is different in terms of looking at your relationship with nature, and then the prescription has to do with reintroducing nature connection back into your everyday life.
If you're reintroducing a nature connection, let's say somebody's having marital problems, right? What I heard from you is that a nature connection, you're studying that as the foundation? Is that what you're saying? Making that connection first?
That's right.
And then and then what? What happens?
Well, you know, nature can be interpreted a lot of ways. I include human nature in that, and the body, and natural ways of living. In addition, you know, people think of ecotherapy and they think, oh good, I'll go on a wilderness expedition. It doesn't have to be that. But in terms of couples therapy, it's really important that couples I think the research shows that couples are now spending about 15 minutes a day in each other's company. Well, how is a marriage going to survive? And of course, most of that is saying, will you take the kids to soccer tomorrow, honey?
Wow.
So
wow. 15 minutes, I am incredulous. You can't.
That's how bad it's gotten. And then people wonder why we're not getting along. And then they sort of blame each other or they blame themselves instead of saying, wait, let's back up and look at what's natural in your life and what's unnatural and how we can shift that balance.
Sounds like making those threads to reconnect all kinds of connections.
That's right.
All kinds. I mean, I can imagine somebody who's, for example, has an eating disorder.
Exactly.
Is trying to feel some hunger that food isn't doing, obviously.
That's right. And our whole relationship with food is, of course, a human nature relationship. And beginning to heal that.
Right.
I mean, we're gardeners, and we have about 60 or 70 fruit trees in our backyard, which is not that big. And gardening has been one of our eco-therapies that we do.
Right, yeah, it works for both of us and for others. You know, it's hard to have a fight in the garden.
Oh, that's a great story.
Is.
It's hard to have a fight. I mean, yeah, the birds come out and sing, or something's blossoming, or yes.
That's right.
Now I can imagine that as a prescription right there. It's just go out in some lovely garden.
That's right.
That feels restful to you.
That's horticultural therapy. And there really is a field called horticultural therapy.
Right.
Absolutely.
This is wonderful to hear. So if you were going to, obviously our viewers are not going to, be able to do personal therapy with you right here at this point, but can you give me a sense of if you were giving advice to people, who are feeling discontent in their lives all the way to being, going into therapy already, what kinds of suggestions you give to your clients?
Well, one simple thing people can do is to keep a time diary and just track for a week how much time they spend inside, how much time they spend outside, how much time they spend in front of a screen or various media versus with people, in contact with people, especially people they really care about. And the contact with animals. There's another whole part of ecotherapy that has to do with animal-assisted therapy, which is now being used in old people's homes, in hospitals. I mean, blood pressure goes down when you're touching another person or a pet.
So there's what we really are following up with is as we return to those closer to our roots, we social animals.
That's right.
That's de-stressing.
That's right. And we relax and we're happier and we slow down. Yeah.
I bet that's really fulfilling for you.
Yeah, I like doing it.
I'll bet, just to have people coming out happier, not with more prescriptions or so on.
That's right. So
you two, in terms of this link here, you two, in your therapy, you're together. You have this wonderful small. It's actually a fairly small yard. You're not talking acres here.
No.
But just chock full of all kinds of unusual plants. So how did you get into this, and what is this?
We both shared a love of gardening, and when we moved to this house, we wanted to do something different. We'd been reading about edible landscaping. I'd read this somewhat famous Japanese author named Fukuoka, who really was one of the inspirations for permaculture, who did a kind of Zen farming. with minimal intervention in the land.
Was that the one straw revolution?
The one
Something
straw
like that. I
revolution.
remember reading about that and being marveling at the notion of not tilling.
Not tilling, all of that stuff. So all these elements began to come together, and peak oil really tied in the final part of this, because the next step in the garden is growing food. Growing food in itself is healing, and in a food forest, which is how most of our ancestors practiced horticulture in the past for probably 30 or 40,000 years, far longer than people realize, where they were managing the landscape and optimizing it for the most food and fiber and medicine. So we're doing that on a small scale, and I think that's part of the healing too, because you go into that environment and you become a browser and a gatherer again. You go out and pick things for the meal.
So you're just
Right.
doing this
That's
kind of
it.
thing.
Yeah.
We eat our way through.
You're foraging your way through your garden.
So you got that element, and then the food itself is going to be so important for our future security. The average American family consumes more oil a year in the food they eat than in the cars they drive.
No.
Yeah,
Seriously?
Wow. It's because of our bad industrial agricultural practices and the fact that food is shipped so far now. So between the chemicals that fertilize and the pesticides, which are mostly petroleum-based, the heavy machinery they use on these large farms, and then the shipping. Like, even if food is grown in Santa Barbara, if you buy it in the supermarket, it's probably been shipped either to LA or San Francisco to a warehouse to come back down here.
No.
Yeah.
I am astounded at that.
And
Is
that's
it
true
that?
in most places.
I didn't realize we were that inefficient to have that happen.
Yeah, so the figures are, I think that anywhere, people argue about it, but for every calorie of food you consume, it may take 8 to 15 calories of hydrocarbons or petroleum-based products to get that food to you to consume that calorie.
And I've heard even higher.
And some people think higher.
When you add refrigeration to some of this, or
Right.
freezing the energy for that, and being in cold storage for a while, and not counting what it takes to go heat it up, prepare it in our homes as
And
well.
of course, the health part of it too. I mean, if most of your food is either grown yourself or bought from local farmers, preferably organic, you're getting much fresher, healthier food. You're making a huge contribution to your own mental health and to the peak oil and global warming problem. It's sort of a all-around win.
You had mentioned to us earlier about sort of the anthropological angle on this, on the food. So I wanted you to talk about that.
Well, I sort of alluded to it a little bit. I've been doing a lot of reading on this, and the consensus now is in many parts of the world, certainly here in California, the native peoples manage their landscape, and if they weren't agriculturists, they were horticulturists. They were sowing seed, they were doing burning, they were doing pruning. The California Indians were pruning oak trees, they were creating forests with desirable products. They had plantations of plants with fiber growing for their clothes and baskets. They had tobacco plantations. I mean, they were doing large-scale land management at a very sophisticated level. The same thing was going on in the Amazon. They now know that tens of thousands of acres were human-designed food forests in what we used to call slash-and-burn agriculture in a very sneering way. Turned out to be a very sophisticated system where they cleared some land, planted annuals, brought in the perennials, and in 10 or 12 years moved on to the next section, having left a section of mature food forest. One permaculturist, Toby Hemingway, said that down near where the Mayan area, he could turn in a circle in a jungle and identify 190 food, medicinal, or fiber plants in eyesight.
Wow.
In one of these food forests.
Certainly you have a richly biodiverse place,
Yeah.
but it's like people knew what to do with them.
They did.
So in your garden, in your food forest, I guess is what it is what I didn't see was rows of, I saw a lot of trees and bushes. So tell me about what kinds of things, what's a food forest? I mean, what do you plant in it?
Well, it would be a sort of a technical discussion. I'm not sure you'd want me to get into on the different layers of it. But, we have big canopy trees, the tall trees. provide habitats for birth, and then the understory trees are a lot of fruit trees, some seed trees, avocado, a couple nut trees, and then there's vines growing up the trees that have edible things on them, like chayote. There's the berries that are sort of the underplantings, and various other edible plants. We have various bulbs and tubers that are all edible. So it's like all the different layers that you would find in nature, and actually much of what we thought of as nature was really human-managed landscapes, are present there. And it's a very liberating feeling. It's very different from that first pass that people took at survivalism, where they thought if they could lock themselves up with guns and 5 years of packaged food, they could make it through the crisis. You know, this is long-term survival, and it assumes community and interdependence of people, not
That's actually a really good point here, is that I know that some of the folks who get involved with peak oil, some mentalities go to that kind of survivalist, lock myself up, get away from everybody, and that feels so counter to, certainly a world as full of people as ours.
Yeah, it's not
just
really going to work.
Possible to do, or it's not going to be a pleasant experience at all.
Right. That's part of why in ecotherapy we also work on community building. Because that's, at least my philosophy, is that we're going to need to get back some of those skills at building community and being a tribe and a group of people again if we're going to survive.
And that's what I hear in your you said that your garden, your forest, assumes other people and community. How so?
Well, our hope is, you know, I've been doing a lot of teaching of this, and so has Linda, is that we're going to encourage more people to do this, and gradually we're going to have more community trading of food, trading of seeds, trading of plants. You know, not everybody's going to grow as much food as we're attempting to do here, but, you know, maybe somebody has plum trees and somebody else has avocados, somebody else has nuts in it. So it all starts going away. This is what they've done in Cuba. Hopefully, we're going to have enough community resources, along with a few key local organic farms, that we should be able to survive just fine in a place like Santa Barbara.
I would imagine that's true, because what I saw as we came into Santa Barbara from your south is a lot of farmland, and also north of you, right? There's a lot of farmland. I mean, you're basically mostly a rural farming county. Is that fair to say? Well, you've also got a lot of mountains.
Right, but it's very beleaguered. There are definitely people who would like to pave all this over and continue the suburban nightmare. So it's a process going on here where more and more people are beginning to be aware that we've got to preserve our agricultural land that's close to where a lot of people are.
So that you're not, I mean, that pressure for development to use our good farmland, the remaining good farmland for development, I see it everywhere we go.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Makes
no sense.
And it's not just conservative folks that people assume are the ones that are doing this. You know, there's very liberal social justice people in town who think it should all be turned into low-cost housing. And it's a wonderful goal to have low-cost housing, and I support it, but the people got to eat.
Right.
You know, it's not going to be enough if we pave over every piece of farmland and put up low-cost housing, which somehow never happens anyway. It always ends up being estates.
Yeah, that that does tend to happen. I noticed that as you both have involved a little bit with Post-Carbon Institute and the notion of relocalizing, of having more of your activity, your essentials met locally. Food is the first thing that most groups think about.
That's
and
right.
you're already there. You're involved with that. What else do you see happening around Santa Barbara that's sort of part of that community building, I guess I would say, from what you're saying, Linda, that's already happening in this area?
Well, last evening we had a meeting right here of people who wanted to create a food shed within a particular neighborhood. So that's our next...
What's a food shed?
Okay.
I mean, this is a new idea here.
It's kind of like the watershed, only it's the food shed, where basically, you know, you think of an area as, another phrase for it is eco-hood, where it's really, we're going to pool our resources within that area so that if you have an avocado tree and somebody else has a plum tree and so has an orange tree, that we begin to pool resources. And as an ecotherapist, I'm really interested too, as I mentioned, in the community building, So we need a place to meet. We need potluck dinners.
Yes,
We need all that
yes.
old-fashioned stuff that we've kind
We'll
of
sing the
forgotten
camp songs
about.
again.
That's
Yeah,
it.
I
We
know.
need songs. We need
Well, you've got to have music and
dances,
entertainment and a place for
entertainment,
children
yeah.
to be involved. It would seem
Exactly.
to me that as we get into community building, my hope is that young people will again find out that they are important contributors. We don't just lock them up and put them away in school. We need them to climb the trees, to help sort the nuts, whatever.
That's a whole interesting discussion of how education sort of became factory-oriented and industrial-oriented. And I think we're seeing through the homeschooling movement and other movements that a few folks are beginning to move back from that and say, no, we don't want to just, park our kid at 6 and pick them up again when they're
Right.
18 or 23.
Factory education, I
Yeah.
thought we've got factory farming and
that's it.
and everything. Well, we've taken the industrial model, right?
Exactly.
And laid it onto every
Every
aspect of our
area
lives.
of society has been industrialized. So we're in the process of deindustrializing, deglobalizing, and relocalizing.
Yep.
So what, we've got about 6-7 minutes left. What inspires you? Who inspires you? What keeps you going? I mean, because the news on global climate change every week seems, it's moving along quickly and the news is getting darker. What do you do in response to that? What keeps you going?
Well, the person who inspires me is Joanna Macy because she's giving us a prescription for how to stay sane through this transition. Because I see a lot of people who they go through what I call the waking up syndrome, and they wake up to what we're really facing, which is a big, oh, wow, right? And then they can often go into despair or depression or whatever. And what she says is that we all need to be doing 3 things simultaneously and keep them in balance. And the first one is we do need to stand up and fight the things that are wrong, but we don't want to get stuck there. We don't be only doing that because then you can get, you get burned out. That's
because
burnout
it's just
time.
hard to be fighting
Right.
always. Yeah.
So the second thing is to build the good. In other words, build the life-sustaining society, which in our case has to do with permaculture and just community building and all of that.
Yes.
And the third thing is to raise our level of consciousness, and that happens from programs like this and reading and learning more, but also from finding some kind of spiritual touchstone, whether it's the spirit in nature or whether it's some spiritual tradition, so that we don't succumb to despair. And she talks about moving from despair to empowerment, and that's why I am inspired by her.
That notion, I think when Joanna talks about linking hands, and knowing that we aren't alone in this, I'm sure that that's part of the empowerment
That's right.
that we have, is we aren't
Yeah.
alone in this.
That's right, and we shouldn't do it alone. That's one of my pieces of advice as a therapist, is this is so big, this is so enormous, the changes we're going to have to make, we can't do it alone.
And nobody can carry all of that. I
No,
mean,
and
that's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
We have to end, I think we have to end the competition in this society, this over-competitive society we live in. Every culture I've read about that was successful in the past, in permaculture they say share the surplus. It's one of the big tenets of permaculture. And every culture had these elaborate mechanisms for sharing food, sharing surpluses, giving the hunters who always would never eat what they hunted, they would give it to others. The basket makers who gave their baskets as gifts. An area that was controlled by one family, but they would always, if any other family asked, they could come in and harvest resources. Cultures just did that. It was, I've even taken it all the way back to reading the primate studies now, and chimps and bonobos are nearest relatives, and sharing is a big part of their culture. Food sharing is the social glue that holds them together. So we need to learn to reshare and reconnect. And for me personally, I always tell everybody, the religion that I find in the garden, that's where I connect spiritually.
Religio means that which connects us, that which binds us together. And I think that those roots that we all started with is sort of the base connection, the basic connection of all of us. I imagine that you get inspired and calmed and when you're out of sorts, you get back into some sort of balance. We live in a wild area, so I don't have an edible food forest. I have a wild forest that I live in. and to be there watching. Just I can take the same path every day and it's different every day. You know, there's something that's changed. There's some other bird. There's some, and it's like reassuring to know that there are bigger forces at work for all of us, and that and I love your notion of community. I can imagine that that a lot of the dis-ease in our culture is simply a great deal of loneliness.
I think you're
that
right.
we don't even know how to name, that that's what we are. And we try to fill it up with a computer or the television or you know, sound or something happening all the time or anything else. So, and I asked Linda, thank you. What inspires you? What inspires you what would you give to somebody as a little nugget to take away?
Well, what inspires me is when I teach this stuff, watching the light go on people's face and say, oh, this isn't so hard. I can do a bit of this. You know, here we are. We've got all these suburbs and cities and stuff. We can't throw this all away. And it's terribly important we retrofit it and work with what we have, learn to live differently. So when I can see people wake up to the possibility, that's what inspires me.
Thank you. Thank you both. This has been a real treat. I've enjoyed that, and I think that Santa Barbara is very fortunate to have you both and others working for a kind of community vision. I expect that when we come back and talk with you in 5 years, you'll tell us about stories about the food sheds and the fences that aren't there and the food swaps and the seed swaps and the whatever else that will be happening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm in Santa Barbara with people that are going to be eating well in the future. Join us next time.